Hello, I'm Andrew Susskind, and I'm a psychotherapist and author based on the west side of Los Angeles since 1992, specializing in trauma and addictive compulsive behaviors. Welcome to my podcast, named after my recent book and workbook, It's Not About the Sex. Here we have direct and honest conversations related to compulsive sexual behavior and trauma, all from a sexual health perspective. Our intention is to offer fresh viewpoints and practical strategies toward establishing greater intimacy and a more deeply connected life. Let's begin. Chapter 5, Regulating the Nervous System. Having grown up in the 70s in a turbulent family, I found creative ways to cope with the chaos of our home. First, I worked hard to find best friends in my neighborhood. As a matter of fact, I was lucky enough to be adopted by 3 families before the age of 14. I also tried to stay as busy as possible, except for stopping long enough to watch the 70s sitcoms such as All in the Family and MASH. I was always on the go. Doing, achieving, and perfecting became my survival strategies to avoid the sadness, hurt, and anger deep within. If I did enough, achieved enough, and perfected enough, somehow I would be more lovable and desirable. These coping skills worked well enough until they stopped working in high school. Although I was rather resilient and resourceful, my survival strategies left me longing for unconditional love from my family. Instead, I experienced competition, envy, and shame. As a result, my perfectionism grew intolerable. All I really wanted was to be loved for who I was, a curious kid longing for authentic connection. In retrospect, I realized that I was doing the best I knew how, but my way of distancing mushroomed into out-of-control sexual behaviors. In the early 90s, I had a very wise therapist named Bert, who strongly suggested I slow down and listen to the rhythm within, or else my underlying misery would grow. At the time, I had never heard this expression, and it deeply resonated with me because I had always been so compulsively busy as to ignore what was really going on inside of me. He was the first person who ever told me that I needed to throw away my to-do list to make room for simply being. More than a quarter of a century later, I admit that I am still a list maker, but I'm not doing it compulsively or unconsciously. In addition to my other compulsive tendencies, perfectionism and busyness predated some of my other vices. In some ways, they were the birthplace of my attempts to numb and feel less.
I like that. This is kind of the first time we're hearing you speak about your perfectionism issue. You've talked about that a lot in the podcast, but I like just kind of now hearing where it came from, how it emerged um, through as a coping mechanism. So, can you say a little bit more about the title of this chapter and what's significant to you about it?
Sure. So let me just go back to what you said about perfectionism, because I think it's important to tie that in here. My perfectionism was really an attempt to feel better. And it was actually an attempt to regulate my nervous system because I was, whether I knew it at the time or not, I didn't know the words, but I was dysregulated most of the time. I was anxious. Sometimes I was depressed, sometimes even hopeless. And one way that I worked with that, or one way that I tried to compensate for that, was through being absolutely perfect, right? Being teacher's pet,
Hmm.
being the straight A student, and trying so hard to be seen and actually admired for my achievement rather than who I was. It reminds me of John Bradshaw back in the 80s. He talked about what he said, human doings versus human beings.
Hmm.
And my childhood was all about human doing.
Interesting. I like
So
that.
yeah, yeah. So that's
Even though you think that you would be inwardly um, healing yourself, it was more of a outward projection. You weren't really healing yourself by making the list and being busy. It was what you were putting out, but you still needed to take the time to slow down and actually do some reflection later on.
Exactly. And part of that, Sue, was really, it's what I call a misfired attempt to feel better.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so there was short-term relief from lining up all my toys or putting all of my t-shirts on hangers or whatever it took to make my environment orderly
Right.
and not like the chaos outside of my room, basically.
Hmm.
So I say all of that, with a bittersweet heart because the kid in me, the little kid, was trying so hard to feel better, to feel a little bit of relief. And I did get it. But like I said, until about high school, I held it together until I couldn't hold it together anymore.
Yeah, your body was like, I need more. I need something different. I need, yeah, need to
That's
feel,
right. And
yeah.
so when I came up with a chapter called Regulating the Nervous System, I I was thinking back actually to grad school, which for me was late 80s, early 90s. And we did not talk about the nervous system in the years that I was at UCLA. It just wasn't part of our language. My program was very psychodynamically based, very family systems based. And that's really what a lot of the focus was at the time. So I don't regret any of that, but it wasn't until probably the mid 90s, late 90s, when research and treatment started to talk about how the nervous system was part of the healing, right?
Hmm.
So it wasn't just about the thoughts and the feelings, which are significant, of course, in understanding and awareness and insight. But when we add the body, when we add the nervous system, it's a whole new frontier. And so it just actually excites me that we've come this far, that a lot of people don't even realize that it's a fairly new concept.
Yeah, I love that whole holistic approach, really. I mean, it's talking about making the connections, mind, body, spirit, everything that's us, right?
That's right.
Yeah. And it's a like what's his name? Joe Hari will say, the opposite of um addiction isn't sobriety, but it's connection. And I think that's connection with ourself too. I know he was talking more like global with community, but I really think until you connect everything together for yourself, that's when, there's healing. But
For sure. I can't agree more. I mean, the way I think about it is that it's connection to self, right? Connection to what's going on inside of us,
mhm.
connection to others, and really having an open channel of love between ourselves and others who we trust and care for, and connection to something larger than ourselves,
Yeah,
whatever that might be to you.
beautiful. So I like what you said, the rhythm within. Um, and it has some rhythm to it, right? Following the rhythm within. So that's one of your subtitles, actually. Can you explore or explain a little more to us? Like, what does that mean to you?
Right. So as I mentioned in the intro, Bert was my first significant mentor in some ways. Back in the 90s, he was a therapist of mine. I was in a group of his. It was a consultation group, actually. But he was really about what he would call the here and now, I and thou, right? So that the relationship, I and thou, and being in the present tense, in the here and now. And I learned so much from him. And when he used the expression, the rhythm within, this was many years ago, must have been somewhere in the mid 90s. It just resonated for me so strongly because I had never truly paid attention or slowed down enough to listen to what the rhythm within was really telling me. And really all it refers to is being able to slow down enough to really tune in to what's going on inside, right?
Hmm.
It's profound. It's has a lot of magnitude to it, but in so many ways, it's very, very simple. And I find that the easiest way to get there is through meditation, through prayer, through mindfulness. There's many, many ways to do it. I mean, as you know, I swim a couple days a week, and for me, my swimming is meditative.
Hmm.
And sometimes it's where I do my best work on listening or following the rhythm within. And so I just credit Bert. He's not with us physically anymore,
Hmm.
but I credit him with the legacy of what the rhythm within means to me.
Yeah, and you said, it doesn't have to be difficult. It can really be simple. Can you read us a portion about rest and relaxation that is in your book, right?
Of course. And
Okay.
and I just want to say that this is really an extension of following the rhythm within. It's really about how I happen to create a tone setter for myself each morning. But there's no formula, there's no one size fits all. It's really about trial and error. It's taken me many years to arrive at this particular way of starting my day. And this is different from what it was 5 or 10 years ago. And I'm sure it'll be different 5 or 10 years from now. So from page 49, again in chapter 5, it goes like this. My morning ritual is simple. I sit quietly on my cushion in a designated space in my home. Then I read one page from an inspirational book, as well as a morning prayer that resonates with me. I then sit for 10 minutes. As a recovering perfectionist, I try not to beat myself up for not sitting longer, but instead I try and honor myself for the time I do commit to sitting. This is the tone setter for my day. I feel the difference when I skip my morning ritual, and my day tends to flow easier when I engage in this sacred morning space. For me, mindful meditation is one way to regulate my nervous system and to breathe into the knowledge that I'm simply a living, breathing organism, just like all the other human beings on our planet. I forgot to mention that my Cocker Spaniel Bowie sits, or generally sleeps, in the room with me as he patiently waits for our morning walk. And his presence is also quite regulating for me and for my nervous system. Whether you find ways of self-regulating or mutually regulating, your system relaxes when you feel more trusting in yourself, others, and your environment.
So true. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
One thing that I always love to learn about, and I'm interested to hear you speak about the window of resilience and how it helps build awareness between regulation and dysregulation. Can you tell us a little about that?
Of course. I love this because it's one of the images that has been designed, a diagram that's been designed by people who are really masters in the field and who are experts on the nervous system and on the regulation of the nervous system. So this happens to originate from Dan Siegel, who's from UCLA. And Dan put together what he calls the window of tolerance. Now,
Hmm.
without going into it, I understand the window of tolerance, but I actually shifted towards the window of resilience that was a modified version put together by Elaine Miller Karras. And Elaine actually started the trauma resilience model, and she's located here in Southern California. And she's a wonderful example of a somatically trained clinician who put together a lot of ideas around how to distinguish and how to understand in our bodies the difference between a regulated state and a dysregulated state. Now, it's hard to share the whole 9 yards without the diagram, but I'm going to share the difference between regulation and dysregulation. A regulated state in our nervous system is when we feel most like ourselves, when we feel most calm, peaceful, and grounded, when we feel resourceful, resilient, and the third R, regulated. So resourceful, resilient, and regulated. So that's the zone that hopefully we can live in most of the time, right? But then life comes along. We have an argument with a close friend, or we have a stressful day at work, or somebody cuts us off in traffic. And that's when we get either up regulated or down regulated. Up regulated means we get anxious, we get really angry, we get hypervigilant, we just have all kinds of, like, an adrenaline surge, almost like the accelerator is on inside of us. That's upregulation, which is one form of dysregulation. On the other hand, let's say we get down on ourselves, or depressed or hopeless, or we shut down. That's a down regulation, and that's another form of dysregulation. But in a way, the important thing about all of this is that it's human to upregulate and it's human to downregulate. Now, when we can be aware of what's going on inside of us, and we know that we're upregulated, or we know that we're downregulated, then we can use strategies and tools to find our way back to a more regulated state more efficiently.
Right.
That's the hard part. That's the practice, and that's really the art of finding a way back to a regulated nervous system. I'll give a really fast example. I have an argument with my partner, and I just feel like crap. And I don't know how to get out of it. I'm in a funk. That's a down regulation. And I think to myself, okay, who knows us best and who would really be there with me at a time like this? So I often lean into mutual regulation. So I might call you, Sue.
Mhm.
I might call you, and I get on the phone and I say, Sue, you're never going to believe what happened. We had this argument. It was horrible. I just want to, you know, go far, far away and feel like crap and all of that. And what might you say or do at that point?
My first go-to would be, okay, let's take a deep breath.
Mm-hmm.
Let's try to relax a little bit. Maybe go for a walk, clear your head, and come back to it and see how you feel. Give yourself some time to respond.
Can I put my ear pods in and go for a walk with you? Would that be something you could do with me,
That
Sue?
I would love to do that. Let's do that.
Okay. So that's an example where hopefully I can dig into my resourcefulness and into my toolbox, into different ways of, in this case, finding an emotionally reliable person who I've known a long time, who knows us as a couple, and can simply be there with me, right? And that's regulating, right? That's the beauty of regulation. This is not rocket science.
Right.
But chances are, if I go for that 10-minute walk with you, Sue, I'm going to feel better. I may not be completely regulated, but I'm going to feel better, and probably more like myself again, even after a few minutes with you.
Right. Yeah. That's the hope.
Exactly. That's the hope.
But I think your awareness to reach out to somebody, your awareness to know that you're dysregulated and that it's uncomfortable, having that awareness in your body and understanding it is really the first step. That's what you said, right? To be aware. So getting to that awareness does take practice.
I, I, I just want to highlight, and I said this before, that a lot of people, including myself in the past, don't even pay attention to the point where they know whether they're regulated or dysregulated. So you're right. Sometimes that first step, you know, I admit that I'm powerless over regulation and dysregulation, or I want to build my awareness. I want to have the willingness to build my awareness around what it means to simply know when I'm dysregulated, and maybe have a toolbox of
Hmm.
possibilities that can bring me back to a more regulated state.
Yeah, that's fantastic to have that in place. But yeah, like you said, it's human. It's gonna happen, you know. Do you ever notice how like Bowie, like I noticed with Lola, like she'll come in from a walk before she walks in the door, she'll shake. And I feel like she's just regulating herself from, just shaking it off. If we just like shake our bodies before we walk in places, maybe that will help us too. Like,
I agree wholeheartedly. I think that part of my journey has been to come from a more frozen state, like feeling frozen in my body, to a more thawed state. And I
mm-hmm,
think dogs and animals in general are so great at intuitively knowing how to move the energy through them.
mm-hmm.
And so that's been my quest for quite a while, is how to move that energy through me so that I'm not feeling stuck in that place.
Let's chat a little bit about attachment style. So, how does that attachment style and your nervous system communicate to one another?
Right. So they go together actually very artfully in some ways. And I think it's more intricate than this, but I'm going to keep it very simple. So a lot of folks with addictive compulsive behaviors and a lot of folks with trauma come from some kind of insecure attachment, right? Without having to name all the different categories. And the insecure attachment is really based on growing up around some kind of danger, some kind of inconsistency,
Mm,
some kind of intrusion, or some kind of abandonment, right? So, what happens to the nervous system is automatically it is in survival mode a lot of the time.
mm,
So, instead of it having a experience, the nervous system having an experience of feeling safe enough, feeling trusting enough of oneself, but also of one's environment and the people around us, usually family. It really is oftentimes about moving in the direction of a more secure attachment over time. So the healing trajectory is, for me, has always been about finding those people in my life who have truly been in my corner, who have my back. And that's where, in my story, I've always been the heat-seeking missile. I've always
mhm,
been the kid who has found people who are really dependable. I mean, not just like they're from time to time, but when the going gets rough,
mhm,
they show up. And so I've been really blessed in that way. You're one of those people, Sue. I remember several times that was the case.
mhm,
And so when I feel more trusting and when I feel safer with someone, my nervous system gets to relax. My nervous system gets to say, I get to exhale. So if we flip that around, on the other hand, if I'm not feeling trust or I'm feeling less safe, the nervous system has all kinds of trouble relaxing. And that's where it perpetuates the dysregulation. So we're always looking for, of course, the nervous system to regulate, but we're also looking for that feeling of trust. So in the simplest terms, if you're feeling trusting of someone, chances are your nervous system is relaxing. If you're feeling distrustful, your nervous system is going to be working overtime.
mhm. And then that comes with other things too, right? The hormones that are flying around our bodies, the cortisol, the adrenals, those the type of things can happen when you're dysregulated. So it's important to kind of keep your eye on that and help help relax a little bit.
Well, it's so intricate. I'm glad you mentioned that because the body as a whole is such a miracle in so many ways. But at the same time, we're so vulnerable, right? It's such a precarious balance. And so what we're trying to do in a sense is to train the brain that we're okay, right? To train the brain that we don't have to be working so hard, or in my case, being overly busy or overly scheduled, or any of that, because that's where the chemicals just are firing so fast and are
Mm.
in a way overcompensating for the possibility of truly relaxing and regulating. So we're going to wind down our time today by going over what I call your practice. And at the end of each chapter in the workbook, there's a section called your practice, which really are suggested action steps, suggested awareness steps. And Sue and I are going to alternate and share the your practice section of this chapter, regulating your nervous system. Number one, describe your relationship with a higher power. You may be comfortable with the word God, universal energy, nature, or your favorite pet, anyone who is fully in your corner. If you don't relate to any of these possibilities, no worries. Simply searching for something that helps regulate the nervous system.
Number two, identify the dolphins in your life. Those who are loyal, playful, fun, inviting, and loving. Turn to these individuals when you're feeling dysregulated, and the contact will be soothing for you.
Number three, busyness is endorsed in our culture. Be a rebel and pursue stillness in your everyday living.
Number four, rest and relaxation is not an option, it's a necessity. To function in our everyday lives, recharging is essential. Schedule downtime into your life on a consistent basis and find someone to help you stay accountable for this intention.
Number five, if you have a loving pet, they are some of the best nervous system regulators. Double up your time with them and notice how you co-regulate each other. If you don't have a pet, borrow one occasionally for your regulation fix.
Number six, bookend your day. So create a consistent morning tone setter as well as a bedtime ritual. It doesn't have to be perfect, but try to create sacred space for you to listen to the rhythm within.
And seven, refer to the window of resilience to remind yourself when you are either upregulated or downregulated. Hold the intention and the efforts to find your way back to the resilience zone more efficiently.